Finding problems? That's easy. They exist in every community. I'm Terry Springs, your host. We're looking deeper, and we are talking solutions, finding out how we all can make a difference. I've got Erin Breen in-house. We are going to be talking about pedestrian safety. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Terry.
I was saying that we've both been in town for a very long time, and I just know that we got together back in the mid-'90s when I was doing stuff.
I've been doing this job for a really long time, or we could have gotten together about theater. Mm-hmm. We could have gotten together.
Women in communication.
Right. Lots of,
Electronic Media Awards. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Las Vegas has grown so much over the years, just ballooned. For those of us inside the city, this is a very small town.
That's so true. We were doing I think it was Maryland Parkway study meeting, and they brought in a national team, and they were saying, well, you don't really have pockets like other communities around the United States. And I said, oh, yeah, we do. The people who have lived here for a really long time, that's a greater pocket than any other, I think.
It's the best. It's the most giving. We are all into this community, and some people move to Las Vegas and they're not into it. They go, I hate it here. I go, well, free country. You go ahead and go.
And then they come back.
Well, they do, because Las Vegas is unique, and I love this place, and it's so good to have you back in. How could I not have you in for 15, 20 years?
I don't know.
Especially when we've got a topic like pedestrian safety. Now, I know when we were getting together to actually book time to sit down and do this discussion, you were so busy, with school having just started.
Right.
You were busy.
We were busy. We'd do our annual All the Ways You Travel to School as a kid. And it definitely takes up a lot of time.
And every single day. Because it was so cute. You sent me the email saying, well, I can't get with you quite yet because I've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Saturday, Sunday, yes.
I don't doubt that either. Do you go into areas where you can talk to kids about how they can be safe?
Well, we do that throughout the year, and we do that partnering with not only the school district, but with the Safe Key program. We work with Patrick Kelly Youth Foundation on their PK Bike Day. So we do pedestrian and bicycle safety to children, and to middle schoolers, we call it pre-driver's ed, because that interests them. And then with the high schoolers, we just go in and talk about all the different ways that they're traveling to school. But we do that actually in the school year. My thing last week was trying to talk to parents about their role in getting children safely to school, both as parents and as drivers on the road. And they're the worst offenders.
You watch where kids are being dropped off and picked up in front of schools?
Absolutely.
That's crazy.
Double parked, triple parked, and it's worse after school because then the parents, they're impatient and they're honking the horn, and even though there's a crossing guard, they're motioning to their kid, and they're angry when their child does not dart across the street to their vehicle.
Because that 2 minutes that you might spend doing it safely.
And the other crazy thing, and the thing that I really was hammering in the last week, we as a society have gotten either so lazy or so afraid that we don't allow our children to walk or bike to school, even though we live half a mile or less away from where they're going. And they're missing all these building blocks, not to mention the freedom. I feel sorry for kids. I really do, because, being a longtime Las Vegan, and I will not say how many years ago that we could just leave in the morning and come home when the streetlights came on. That was the cue. I lived behind the Boulevard Mall, and we would hightail it up to Maryland Parkway and catch the bus and go downtown. And I understand it was a different world, but for children to not be able to walk a half a mile to school, what we're seeing now is that parents double and triple park at the bus stop. So their children, they don't even allow them to walk from the bus stop home. And they're missing building blocks, but also that double and triple parking is downright dangerous.
It is. There's all kinds of problems that happen outside of schools because of things like that.
Absolutely. And so now we're seeing it at bus stops too. So get a walking school bus going in your neighborhood. If you live less than half a mile, even a mile, it's really not that far. And if you are so paranoid, have different parents walk. As their family joins, then that parent gets to drop off and go home, and they've really only walked a few blocks. Or if you have no choice but to pick up your child at school, park a few blocks away and walk in to pick them up, because it's creating havoc around schools.
Another thing that it also affects is our movement, the fact that we are all too sedentary.
Absolutely.
And so that impacts our health.
Right.
It's a slippery slope. Locked together.
Yeah, and it's building blocks on top of the whole health issue, which is huge. But kids don't walk, and then they don't bike. But yet when they turn 16, we toss them the keys to a car, expect them to take their brothers and sisters to school too.
Your turn.
And they don't understand why kids can't interact with traffic, and it's because they've never had to. And one of our messages in the last week was that the single most dangerous way to travel to school is in a vehicle driven by an older sibling or another teenager. And that's another huge issue.
It's true.
Yeah.
Surveys and statistics show you that teens who are just learning how to handle that car themselves, having other friends in the car with them, when they have other passengers in the vehicle, they are so much more likely to get into an accident. And they're already high risk.
Because they can't multitask the way that they think that they can, and none of us can. It just takes us a few years to understand that we can't multitask behind the wheel. But kids in cars, that's why it's illegal if it's not a family member. If it were me, I wouldn't allow them to drive my children either. But the law says that if it's a non-family member under the age of 21, they're not allowed in the car for the first 6 months the teenager has their license. And that's why. So that they can pay full attention to the road. But we have lots of ways to distract you behind the wheel.
Oh, yeah. And I'm going to cover that, too. This is such an important topic. Pedestrian safety, and we have such a problem in Las Vegas. And certainly those kids behind the wheel of cars, if you're a pedestrian, I wouldn't be wanting to be around that either.
Right. I tell people all the time, it's like an onion. You know, you think you have the solution, but then we can peel that layer back and show you what the problem is. Someone this morning on the way up here just talking to me about people trying to make a transfer on a bus. And you don't realize as you drive down the street in your air-conditioned couch, the plight that people who are using public transportation, if they miss a bus, you know, it'd be the difference between having a job or not having a job, or sitting out where it's 180 degrees on the pavement for 45 minutes in some locales waiting for the next bus. And the RTC does a magnificent job, you know, as our metropolitan planning organization. They really are top notch. And there is so much that is involved in that as well. Because of air pollution issues, our bus stops are what we call far side, so that they're not at a signal unloading a bus and then catching a red light on top of it and idling there even longer. So they have them come through the intersection and park on the far side. What that does for an awful lot of people, because you can't get close enough to the corner, it's farther ahead. And then the person getting off of the bus, they can see their connecting bus. And they do what I affectionately and lovingly refer to as the 7-lane dash to death. And very often we have a tragedy on our hands.
By the way, we've got Erin Breen in today. We're talking about pedestrian safety on Talking Solutions. The thing that you were describing with the RTC, as you said, for pollution reasons and a lot of reasons, and I would imagine it's also for traffic flow, too, to get that bus through the intersection and on the other side.
Everything's for the almighty car.
Oh, man. It is a car world, especially here. But you end up making the dash across the street. And you're right. And people who get off that bus and need to make a connection, they get off, they see the other bus, they don't have a lot of time. It's their chance, and boom, they run.
And, you know, they know that they're risking their lives. And yet the general population calls them names and thinks that they're less than smart. You've never been in their shoes. I love to walk into a room of people that talk about pedestrian safety, and the first thing that I always ask is show of hands. Who's ever been a walking commuter? Doesn't matter who the audience is in Las Vegas. 2 or 3 people raise their hands.
Not a lot of hands.
Not a lot of hands.
I didn't raise mine just now because I don't think I've been in that category.
Yeah, talk about walk a mile in their shoes. So we have this built environment here, and Durango's the perfect example. It's wide, it's flat, and it's unbelievably fast. As a driver, you're really comfortable going more than the posted 45 miles an hour. Yeah,
it's just a suggestion.
Yeah, it is. And unfortunately, we have a lot of those just a suggestion. So you have an issue with pedestrians and few places to cross the street that are safe. You know, on a 45-mile-an-hour street, if there's not something physically stopping traffic, it's not a safe cross. But here you have big stretches of blocks with nowhere to cross legally. You ask yourself, how far are you willing to walk? And that's another one of my favorite questions, because the reality is, go to any grocery store, mall, whatever, and you see people trolling up and down the aisles for a parking spot, because as a society, we're not willing to walk. But we're really willing to say that they should walk a half a mile out of their way. And then there's the whole issue of, do cars stop for them when they're doing the right thing and they're being predictable? Again, on a street like Durango, you have other streets that intersect Durango, which makes it a legal cross for the pedestrian. There doesn't have to be a painted crosswalk. It's not a smart cross. cross. I would never suggest it, but it's legal. And I think that there's a lot of drivers who very conveniently say they don't belong there, so they don't stop. And in fact, it's the driver that's breaking the law. So we've created this hostile environment for people on foot. We've created a real struggle between the walker and the bicyclist and the motorist. Motorists not watching and not caring when they see them because they can. It's kind of like a bully thing. And I would be remiss if I did not also say that sometimes people on foot take risks that they shouldn't and they do stupid things. We all do because we're all human beings. When it comes right down to the bottom line, aren't we all human? And as humans, we do dumb things. But we live in a city that's built for vehicles. And if you're not somebody behind the wheel of a car, you're really kind of screwed.
We're talking with Erin Breen today about pedestrian safety. Erin, what is your actual title? I just want to lay it all out there, make it official.
My actual title these days is that I am the director of the Vulnerable Road Users Project in the Transportation Research Center at UNLV. We recently, in the last year, changed the name of the program from Safe Community Partnership to Vulnerable Road Users Project because they narrowed my focus. I used to deal with all different kinds of traffic safety, but because we have so many issues with pedestrians, with bicyclists, with teenage drivers a little bit, I still work in that area, and senior drivers and senior pedestrians. Sadly, that is the fastest growing population of pedestrian fatalities. In the last 5 years, our average pedestrian fatality age has ticked up an entire decade. It's so heartbreaking that 85, 86, 87-year-old people crossing these streets like Flamingo and Durango at night, mid-block. You just got to wonder, what are you doing out there? Why? They're so fragile. They can't move fast enough. It's indicative of a bigger problem.
That's what I'm seeing. We were just mentioning a few minutes ago how we've both been in Las Vegas for a very long time. I don't remember in decades past this pedestrian safety issue being as critical as it is now.
I don't think it was because, A, we didn't have the population that we have that don't own a vehicle, and B, we've grown so rapidly and our streets are so fast. And, that's something that it's my favorite soapbox, the speeds in Las Vegas. We have a zero fatality program here. I believe in it wholeheartedly. But there's other cities that have adopted Sweden's program called Vision Zero. And Vision Zero, the bottom line is that it says people are the most important and that we value them over efficiency, which is just such a, it's almost unheard of. And that we build streets with human frailties in mind, knowing that we're not going to behave in the way that the book says we're going to, because we don't. We're human. So it looks at every crash as what could we do differently to prevent this from happening and being worse next time. And then it mitigates those problems. And the first thing it does, New York City adopted it January 1st, 2014, dropped their pedestrian fatalities 30% in the first year. There's not a street in Manhattan that has a speed limit that's over 25 miles an hour.
I've never been to New York City, but all the stuff I see on TV, nobody's moving anyway.
Right. Right.
It's just traffic.
Right. And they did things like they charged you to come inside the city, to drive inside the city. And it did have an effect on pedestrian fatalities, but they still killed 350 people in a year. But on a per capita basis, we're just as bad as they are. We don't have 8 million people in the city, but we have 2 now. So that's why you're seeing the increase. And there's so many reasons on the whole speed issue. I understand that engineers need to move cars, that's their job. And I respect engineers. I don't want anybody to ever think that I don't. And they have a difficult job. But there is a way. And other places are finding the way faster than we are. Things like signal timing. On my way here today, nothing makes me angrier. And it happens every time I come up Desert Inn. I'm the lead car at every red light all the way up.
Yeah.
Because they can't time for progression at 45 miles an hour. It's impossible.
I don't get that. That's what makes my husband nuts.
Well, it should make him nuts.
Drives him crazy.
So consequently, what you have is people like me, if they weren't me and they weren't the traffic safety person, then they hit the gas as fast as they can because now you've stopped them for 180 seconds again. If at every mile you're stopped for 180 seconds, you're trying to make up that time in between. if we dropped the speed limit back, we could time for progression so that you wouldn't hit you'd hit them occasionally because you have to, but you would get, if you caught the green light and you were the first car, well, you'd catch a lot of green lights all the way up the street because they could do what they call progression. So guess what? You wouldn't get to your destination in any less time. Maybe you'd even make better time than you're making now. And not only would pedestrians and bicyclists be safer, but literally so would people in cars. Because at 45 or 50 or 60 miles an hour, which people are going up Desert Inn or down Durango, you get in a car crash, you die in that crash too. But you hit a pedestrian, that's it for them. I think a lot of people don't understand 30 miles an hour, 50% of the population hit at 30 miles an hour die from their injuries. That's just crazy. Average road speed in Clark County, well over 50. Not a lot of chance for survival.
The numbers of people who perish through pedestrian car accidents and die on the roads here when they're out on foot, it's just astounding. And we have these times where we have a little period of time where it's not so bad, and then it goes boom, 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 and it rackets up again.
Unfortunately. And we just came through the greatest example of that. So the good news, the month of July in Las Vegas, we did not have a single pedestrian fatality crash. It's the first time I can remember that ever happening.
That's worth putting up on a pedestal. That's
it totally
what we want.
Is, right? Our numbers were now at 25. We thought at the beginning of the year that we were going to hit an all-time high because coming out of 2014, in November, December, we averaged 10 a month. In January and February of 2015, we stayed at 10 a month. We would have doubled the worst year we'd ever had that stayed. So right now, thankfully, we are under last year's numbers, but you're absolutely right. I was in a meeting last week when we were talking about catching up on some initiatives that have been started. I said, well, July 1st month, and everybody's like, oh, great. And then somebody else sitting next to me said, well, and how are we this month? I said, we made it 32 minutes into the month of August before we had our first pedestrian fatality. And they said, have we had another one? I said, no, and if one happens tonight, it's going to be your fault because the karma of making me say that, So it didn't happen that night, but it happened the following day. It's very cyclical, and just like I can't really explain why it gets so bad, I couldn't explain why, July, we had the mildest July we've ever had, which would make you think that a lot more people were out walking because it was beautiful.
Oh, yeah, it was good for summer here.
Gorgeous July. My power bill didn't go down any, which was incredibly infuriating, but it was a lovely July. So you would think that we'd have a lot more people on the street. And so you have to think that if that were to follow suit, that maybe it was people who had gotten the message. But the message is the tough part because of that whole human being factor. We don't ever think it's going to be us. Never. 52 people last year in our city died crossing streets. And I guarantee you none of those 52 people thought that they were not coming home at the end of the day.
With very few exceptions, that's not why somebody steps out into a lane of traffic.
You're right. With very few exceptions, you're right. But they don't count in our 52
Yeah, those
numbers.
are the people who go out there going, okay, I'm going to do it right now. We're going to end it right here.
Terrible. That's another whole subject. But they wind up not counting as pedestrian fatalities.
It's just a suicide.
But it goes down in the suicide database, not in the pedestrian fatality database. But so many people that think that there's some kind of fairy dust on their head or something. I don't know. I tell people all the time in crosswalks, just because there's a crosswalk there, no magic spikes pop out of the crosswalk to protect you from the car. It's up to you. And as much as I think that drivers play a huge role in teaching pedestrians to behave badly, as pedestrians, I also tell the people crossing the street, never assume a car's going to stop for you. Never assume that they've seen you. You have to take responsibility for that because ultimately you are the one who's going to die. I've never seen anybody, a driver, transported to the hospital, and I've certainly never seen one die in a pedestrian crash. It's the pedestrian every time. We had a crash here beginning of August last year, where the county has now put up a lovely crosswalk, bless their hearts, and it was pretty darn fast in terms of infrastructure, but we lost 2 tourists on Valley View Boulevard crossing between the Rio and the Gold Coast. The Rio has a little crosswalk that comes from their front door in the pattern in their parking lot that they want people to walk, so it's safe for the person in their parking lot. But then it leaves them 200 feet up Valley View, north of Flamingo, and there's a nice break in the wall of the parking garage at the Gold Coast across the street. So if that's where it brought me, I'd cross the street right there too. But As we were out there doing a news story last year, if you've ever noticed when there's a pedestrian fatality, there's a lot of very fluorescent paint on the ground if it's in Metro's jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And they go out and they mark absolutely everything. And if you ever get the opportunity and you think that human bodies can survive vehicle crashes, go and look at some of those pedestrian markings because they're horrific. So there was a lot because 2 people died. So there was lots of different colors, bright paint everywhere, out there doing a story. And in a 40-minute period, we quit counting at 85, the number of people who crossed right there. So we finally started asking people if they would talk to us, whether they were crossing east to west or west to east. So if they had just finished the cross, I'd say, we're out here doing a story because 2 people died here last night. Oh, yeah, I saw it. But
and you're still out here crossing.
Yeah. And people would say to me, yeah, but I made it. Or the people who were getting ready to cross, and they'd say, oh, yeah, but I'll be fine. Did you think that the 2 people crossing the street didn't think that they were going to be fine too?
I think they were thinking the same thing.
Exactly. So we are frail, and sometimes we need to admit that.
People versus car. Car wins.
Car wins. Car wins. I have a favorite poster that has a Sherman tank and a VW Bug, and it says at 40 miles an hour, both are deadly to a pedestrian, and that's a fact. It doesn't matter. We've seen bicyclists kill pedestrians. The first fatality 32 minutes into August was a motorcyclist that killed the motorcyclist and the pedestrian. We're frail beings. And my very favorite campaign we've ever done, it was designed by a high schooler as part of our Save a Life Win a MacBook contest. It was bright yellow, had the pedestrian icon on it, and it said, pedestrians not equipped with airbags. And that is a fact.
That's a clever slogan.
It is. It won.
Won the techie item that you had up for grabs?
It won the MacBook.
Well, good. We have had a real explosion of not only population and growth here in Las Vegas, but what I consider to be an explosion of pedestrian safety problems as far as more people being struck. And I don't hear too many stories where people survive those.
Because of the speed. Surely because of the speed. I just went through the most recent database we have. So the most recent data we have that's complete is 2013. We still have big gaps in 2014 for the back-to-school stuff, looking for kids. And we're doing so much better with children than we were. In 2011, 31% of the number of people that were struck by vehicles were school-age children, the majority of them elementary school-age children. And then in 2012, we dropped that number to 20%. And I had never looked before. Someday I should go back and look and see what it was, if it was just a fluke. But I think that's pretty standard. And then in 2013, it was actually 12.5%. So we're doing much better. But looking closer at that, it's not the elementary school kid now. High school, number 1, and middle school, number 2. Those are the kids that are walking on their own without someone reminding them of the rules of the road. So I tell parents every day you got to remind them because they're kids. I think sometimes with adults, every day you got to remind them. But as drivers, you don't have the right of way at a signalized intersection when the light turns green. Just because the light is green for you, the person that's in that crosswalk, they have the right of way. And it's called superior right of way because they are the fragile being. So it's your job as the driver to look to your right before you make the right turn, to look to your right if you're looking to your left for a gap in traffic if you're on a red light. Because boy, if there's a pedestrian there, or the permissive left turn, the flashing yellow arrow or the solid green ball. People are looking for the gap in traffic so they can make the left turn, but they never track to the crosswalk to see if there's someone legally crossing the street there. Because if you have the green light, so do they. So we've seen a big increase in signalized intersection crashes as well. And every time you pass someone that's waiting at an intersection, whether it be signalized or not, every time you blow past them driving and you don't give them the courtesy of stopping, you're teaching them there's no reward for you to come here. We've created this mess. And most people who drive, they think that they're the victim and that we're, like when we do enforcement, I've had people say, you're trying to entrap us. And I say, no, we give you twice the stopping distance. And if you don't stop for someone in the crosswalk, you get a ticket and you should.
Yeah, when I'm out in the car, yes, I'm trying to get wherever I go, but you think about the time element when you're out driving on the roads, and yes, it may delay you a minute or two, but think about what you're risking if you end up hitting someone who is a pedestrian, who is by their rights supposed to be the one getting...
Right. Well, even if they aren't in the right, unless you're some kind of sociopath, you kill somebody, it's going to change your life forever.
You're going to dream about that for the rest of your life.
Forever. Metro does a training where they bring in a national group to do reconstruction. It's a gentleman by the name of Rusty Haight, and he's a pretty famous dude. So the first time I went to Rusty's training, he has weighted dummies. And the male weighs 185 pounds, the female weighs 120 pounds, and now he has a kid that weighs 85 pounds. They suspend those dummies on a street, and then they take cars that are already wrecked and they run them into the dummies to reconstruct the crash. The sound, literally, yeah, exactly that. And it was years ago the first time I went, and it still makes me sick. I just can't imagine it really happening.
You notice I flinched. I physically flinched when I thought of what that would be.
Yeah.
I need to take a real quick break, but on this special edition of today's Talking Solutions, we will continue with Erin Breen. We're talking pedestrian safety, and in the next segment, we're going to discuss some new laws for all drivers, also things affecting bicyclists, and of course people out on their feet. I know that covers you, so stay with us. We'll continue after this.